Okay, and we should be live. Hey, what's up,
Excellent.
guys? Thanks for joining me. We are here with David Hawkins. How's it going, David?
It's going great. You got a lot of shit in your closet.
Yeah. Yes, I do. They got to do some spring cleaning. So tonight we're going to be talking about the future of cameras and their impact on the public and society. For those of you that are joining us live in the live stream, you can go ahead and leave some comments. We will be monitoring chat, and we'll go ahead and answer any questions that you have and respond to any comments that you have. And yeah, we'll just go ahead and get it started. So David, thank you for joining. I know it's early where you're at. Why don't you just go ahead and start off by introducing yourself, who you are, what you do, and where you're from.
Okay, my name is David Hawkins. I'm with DHI Enterprises, and we are an international team of photographers headed by me, of course. And, we started off in Chicago, which is where I'm from. And from there, I've been taking photos in Japan and France, all over Europe, most of Asia. And what we do basically is on location photography and video for clients, mainly what I do personally is celebrities and red carpets, landscapes, and corporate photography, and also fashion. So somebody needs, a photographer in Paris or Berlin or London, they call me up and I go do the gig. And yeah, that's about it. And I also run the DHI Enterprises YouTube channel where I talk about exactly these things, cameras and, the latest cameras and, hacks and firmware and things like that. Yes, I'm the guy for all of that.
That's great. That's awesome. That's that's amazing. Sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. A lot of work, not much sleep, often up at 5 in the morning talking to strange guys on webcam. That's just how it goes,
Yep, totally understand that.
man.
Okay, so that's good. So then you definitely know photography, which is great. That's why I wanted to have you on, so we could go rather in depth with this discussion on cameras, how they are right now, the current state, and kind of where they're headed. So in your work, what are you currently using to get your work done?
Well, usually I rent cameras on location, but like the cameras that I own are the A7R Mark II and the Panasonic GX85. I also had a pair of GH5s until recently, because of all the problems that they had initially. I returned both of the GH5s that I had. Like I bought one, returned it, bought another one, returned it again. And since then, if I need a GH5 for something, I just rent it. Normally I've got a really good rental shop right up the street, so if I need a C300 or a red or a 5D or whatever the job calls for, I can just go get it, if I need something beyond like the cameras that I already have. So
That's good. Okay, so then you know your way around pretty much in today's cameras, which I guess is a good thing.
well,
How are you?
I think it stresses like an important point. There are all these people running around putting their life savings or 3 or 4 paychecks together and just buying every new camera that comes out. But you can just go to a rental shop and rent the same camera for like 50 or $100, keep it all week, and and you don't have to make those really hard explanations to the wife,
Yeah, I got that one. I'm an advocate. I'm a huge advocate of renting because I feel like that's a great way, even for people who aren't doing it professionally. It's a great way for them to explore a camera that they might have interest in, rather than just dropping a huge sum of money and then not being happy with what they get.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, not just like people who aren't professional, but it's like Ridley Scott doesn't own that $600,000 camera. He doesn't have like, all these a collection of film cameras in his basement or whatever. The movie studios like, loan these things out to the people that are working. And even on the indie scene, somebody needs to go out and get like, I don't know, a $50,000 RE. They go down to the rental shop and get it. They don't put down 50,000 for the camera. That's not how it works.
Right. Yeah. And the people that do go and put that money down, usually in the end, they're taking a very long time to recoup that money,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as
So,
opposed to the guys that are renting and they're able to just continuously get work and continuously use the cameras, utilize them to their full potential.
oh yeah, yeah, and it's like that with everything. Like with the truck that you have out there, the equipment truck with all of the cables and the monitors and all of that, and the sound guys, and the catering trucks and all of the what do you call it? The little village. Did you hear about this village that Robert Downey Jr. had? Like
Oh yeah,
when he,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, all that stuff is rented. Even Robert Downey Jr. isn't actually buying like, a bunch of caravans with like HD TVs in it.
Yeah, no, I completely understand.
Yeah.
So have you, let's before we talk about the current state of cameras and photography and video, uh, have you used film? Were you big when film was kind of around?
They were really sort of like phasing film out when I got started. I was lucky enough to be one of the first people to get into like digital video. So I learned how to use film, but I don't think I ever actually made, any shorts or anything with film myself. I assisted other people in like film production, but my main thing while everybody was looking into that was I was looking into all of the early video editing programs. I mean, Adobe Premiere 1.0, not Premiere Pro, but Premiere 1.0, After Effects 1.0, like, I was
Final
one of
Cut back in the day. I remember Final Cut back in the
yeah,
day.
yeah, original Final Cut, like all of these ancient, like, composite video input decks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
S
so
cart and all that.
yeah, yeah. So that's sort of like how I got into the business. I started off as a sound guy, and then like people asked me if I could, edit some post-production videos. So, I had all of the equipment because of all the Adobe stuff that I had. And so, yeah, I really go back mainly to early digital video.
Yeah, that's kind of about as far as I go back too, is to early digital video, high eight, mini DV, kind of in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
era. And then the DSLR revolution kind of took storm. But the only reason why I bring up film is because nowadays it seems like every time there's a new camera, every time there's like a new announcement within the photography world, it seems like everything else that came before it is just become a relic, outdated, and gets pushed into the past. Kind of how what's happening with film.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's part of like a lot of people's misconceptions that like you can no longer shoot like great video with these cameras, but you can really do a hell of a lot with the original C100 or like original C300, all these cameras like before they had 4K and everything. I mean, there's still people shooting like indie movies and documentaries on those cameras now. So it's not like they've lost their value or their potential, especially considering, the lengths that you would have to go to get like a similar functionality and ergonomics. I think a lot of that craze is mostly coming from, the consumer level. You have all of these like people that you know, see, I don't know, the GH5 or something like, or no, not even the Ursa Mini, something like the GH5 or the A6300, and they think, oh, I'm a director now. They run out and they buy that camera, and then the next year, these guys start marketing up some other camera, and they run out and they buy the next one, and And that's just a consumer mindset. What blew me away was when I was watching the Chicago Cubs win the World Series, and the minute the celebration started, all you saw were cannons everywhere. 5D Mark 3s, 5D Mark 2s, EOS 1Ds, 1DXs, all these old cameras, but like they were pro level cameras, and people weren't upgrading you didn't see anybody running out there with an A7S.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. I noticed that even in the latest announcements of the A9 and release of the Sony A9, I still haven't seen a lot of pros switching to the latest technology. I feel like they're still sticking with the tried and true.
yeah, you're never going to see that, because one of the reasons is that Sony and Panasonic and all these people are still very far today from offering pro level support. I saw over in Japan they have some sort of a pro replacement and warranty package, but like I'm sure that works great if you're in Japan. If you're in Hoboken, New Jersey, probably not so much. And that's sort of like one of the things that pros look for. I mean, you've got people that are actually out there shooting 5,000, 10,000 images for every gig, and they're sending their cameras back to have the shutters replaced and all of that. There's very few companies that I would trust on a professional level to handle something like that. I've actually dealt with Canon's warranty and replacement plan before, and I can say they're legit. I've sent cameras to them and gotten them back the same week with they were completely broken, the sensors were dead, whatever. I've gotten them back in one piece within a week. Nobody else is doing that. So yeah, and I think we've got what, another 50, 100 years before Sony gets to that level.
Yeah, I mean, right now, Canon and Sony and the big three, they're I think, in my opinion, Sony is starting to climb that ladder to get to that professional level, but I still think they're a far way off from what Canon and Nikon are offering. And I don't think it's good that they're kind of bringing everything to the States with this whole Sony professional program, but from what I'm hearing, early reports are that it's just still not up to snuff to what
Yeah,
the other two.
yeah. What's the Australian guy's name with the small head and the big body? Like he does. He also has a YouTube channel. I'm trying to think of his name. I used to watch him. He used to be the Nikon guy.
Oh yeah, Matt Granger.
Yeah, Matt Granger, that guy. He actually went through the whole thing. Like he had replaced all of his Nikon stuff with Sony stuff, and and he used their pro plan, but like they just weren't. It wasn't up to the snuff of what he was used to with Nikon. Like I think the last straw for him was that he was, after every big gig, he would send his cameras in for sensor cleaning, and he was sending them in to for cleaning, and he would get them back, and the sensors wouldn't be clean, or they wouldn't have fixed the one little thing that he wanted them to fix. I mean, it just wasn't like as thorough or as professional as he was used to from Nikon and Canon. And I think the other thing that you have to think about is infrastructure, because you know, Canon has all of these warranty shops everywhere, everywhere in the world, even here in Berlin. They've got something 40 shops that you can take your camera to, and they'll service them. And
Right,
they've
right.
yeah, they've been doing that for the past 50 years or something. So they've got the kind of infrastructure that's going to take Sony a lot of catching up to do.
Right, yeah, and hearing in the news too something like Sony surpassing Nikon as the number two camera distributor, seller, maker in the world, just below Canon.
Hmm.
It kind of makes you wonder, uh, a technology and electronics company like that, coming from making consumer products like cell phones and things like that.
Hmm.
It kind of makes you wonder where we're headed in terms of camera technology and development.
Oh yeah. Well, I think, a large part of Sony's advantage has always been that they're the ones that are making the sensors. As far as I know, they made all the sensors for like all the other Canon brands. So, the technology has given them the ability to sort of like, grow in that accelerated pace. But I think at the same time, right now they're experiencing sort of a whiplash effect because like, they haven't been able to keep up like with the pro level and with what's going on with some of the competition. They've almost grown so fast that they've like, their technology has like exceeded the support for that technology. So
Right. Yeah. You kind of get that feeling too when you hear reports of multiple cameras overheating and
yeah,
bugs inside the software. Those are things that those should be addressed before you even release the product.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's why, you aren't going to see anybody down at like, the goal line of the Super Bowl with like, an A7R2. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
Unless it's some YouTube shooter that has a buddy that was working down there and he could get down there. There's no other way you're ever going to see a Sony camera down there. I won't say ever because, you give them about 20 or 30 years, you give them like an opportunity to like catch up the support with the technology. And yeah, it could happen, but I think we're still like much further off than the people on these Facebook groups would have you believe. They would have you believe, oh, Canon and Nikon are going to go out of business tomorrow. Nikon might, but yeah. That's
So,
another story.
so we've got some questions in the chat here. Sheldon asks, would you fly a drone in Canada knowing how bad the law punishes us videographers for a commercial shoot? And do you think the restrictions will change soon? So
Are you in Canada?
I am not in Canada. I am in the States,
Oh, okay.
just north of New York in Connecticut.
Okay. Yeah.
So would I fly how do I feel about flying a drone in Canada? Well, I don't know the laws of flying in Canada, whether they're stricter than the States or other countries. I'm not too sure about, but what I would say is do your due diligence
Hmm.
and get your licensing. Whatever they require for your particular model, make sure you get that and don't just we just had an incident recently for somebody who was flying a drone over, and this will kind of bring it into where we are present day with cameras and technology. It seems like nowadays a lot of people want drones, and it especially with something like the DJI Spark that was recently announced. It
Hmm.
feels like uh, these companies are trying to get the consumer base really into um, I wouldn't even know what you call it, just photography in general. And a way to do it is drones. And a recent incident that we had was an inexperienced flyer was flying a drone next to a stadium. The drone went into the stadium, fell below the wall,
Mm.
the concrete wall.
Yeah.
Signal couldn't pass through, and the drone went flying into the stadium seats at like 60 miles an hour, almost
Oh
killing
shit.
somebody.
Wow.
So I would again wherever you are, if you're talking drones, I would just do what you need to do to make sure that it's totally legal where you're flying, how you're flying, and what you're flying. What's your take on drones? Do you fly drones?
I build drones actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, interesting. Talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's one of the things that, I wouldn't even go so far as to say that I got in early about it. I don't even remember. I think I just sort of like stumbled upon the idea of building one because they weren't like it wasn't like it is now where you can go into any camera shop or almost any electronic shop and just buy a drone. It was when I first started like hearing about it, the easiest way to get a drone was to build one. And I just happened to need something like that for one of my clients. So, there's this website called rcgroups.com. It's for people that have like radio control cars and boats and things like that. and a shop called Hobby King. So I just started reading up on the forums and like YouTube videos and Instructables, and started putting my drones together. And this, of course, was before all of the regulations, like all of these international regulations in Canada and the United States and Europe, basically just started last year. But I built my first drone about 2 or 3 years ago,
Hmm.
and so at that time the market wasn't regulated at all. But at the same time, it's sort of like the early days of computers, where you needed to practically be a genius just to be able to turn on a computer and use it.
Yeah.
Like, you really had to know what you were doing. It was the same thing with drones. It's like, there was no regulation at all, but like, just to be able to fly one of these things, you had to know so much about it that, like, you were pretty much a professional at that point. But now, I mean, the reason why you're seeing things like the incidents you were talking about at the stadium is that it's just like what happened with computers. Now anybody can just go into a shop and buy one without having to know anything about, like, how it works or what it is, or they just say, oh, I want one of those, and they can go and buy one. And you're talking about inexperienced pilots out there, but, like, just think about drunk pilots, think about pilots that are high out of their minds.
Yeah.
Think about
Yeah.
all the other possibilities. So yeah, all of the new laws and regulations haven't really affected me that much, because they're much slower to get things like that done here in Europe. Like, I'm in Berlin now. They're much slower to pass these laws than they are in the States. I mean, it sort of seemed like in North America, it was overnight. They were like, we need a law now, and so they had a law. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
6 months later, it takes them years to get to that point here in Europe. So it'll be a while before I have to worry about it. Although local governments have passed laws. I mean, one thing to stress is that it doesn't really, take that much effort to get, licensed and regulated. It sounds like a much bigger deal than it is. It usually boils down to maybe taking a short course, or just going down to an office and paying a license fee. And they basically explain to you where you can and where you can't fly. And and you sign a paper, you pay a fee, and that's it. So I wouldn't get so bummed out about regulations. I just, like, go down there and try to do it, and you would be surprised at how little work it is.
Right. So hope that answers your question, Sheldon. So yeah, again, anyone watching in the live stream, go ahead and put your questions and comments. We are monitoring chat, and we'll try to answer them best we can. And anyone watching on the replay, go ahead and add some comments, and we'll try to comment to that. So
Oh, is there a place where I can see the chat?
yeah, if you just open up a second window
Uh-huh.
on the actual video, you'll see the live chat on the right. On the
Oh,
right.
really?
Yeah. All right.
Huh.
So the next thing I want to talk about is, and kind of leads us into where we are today, is, I know we're kind of talking about professionals in Sony
Hmm.
and where they stand, but where do you think overall, or what are your thoughts on just the mass consumer base and something like cell phones, and how they've come into the market and really kind of pushed the point and shoots out of the way? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, well, for one, it's like, sales were on a steady decline for the past, I don't know, 5 years or something like that. But they've actually seen an uptick recently in 2017, which I think, is I think it's closely connected to all of the upheaval and all the things that are going on around the world. Like, you see, like, just about every major event, whether it's like, the terrorist attack in Manchester, or the ones in France. Somebody's there with a cell phone, and, like, a cell phone video winds up on the news. Like, this is a completely new phenomena. I mean, like you were talking about high eights, 8 millimeter cameras, camcorders. They've been around a long time, but it was very rare that somebody with a high eight was running around taking, pictures of, like, a gunfight or something like that. It's
Right,
all
right.
on cell phones. And I think it has something to do with two factors. One being portability, the fact that like now everybody is walking around with a with a HD or 4K camera in their pockets that they can just whip out and take video with whenever they want. And the other thing is that like the accessibility and the price. I mean, it's really easy to use. You press a button and you're already rolling, and it's a device that you own anyway for communication purposes. And now now you're able to take good looking photos and video with it as well. With that said, I think like the reason why there's been an uptick in the sales of you know more traditional cameras is because they become lighter because of mirrorless. I mean, mirrorless sales in particular have gone up, and the form factors have gone down, and the ease of use has sort of like increased. It's basically like we were saying before, the same thing that happened with computers. It's become easier to use these devices. They've become lighter and easier to bring around with you. And I think like at some point, you exceed the needs of you exceed the capabilities of a cell phone, particularly when you're talking about low light. When you're talking about low light, when you're talking about fine detail, when you're talking about autofocus, at a certain point, you definitely exceed what your cell phone is capable of delivering. And so recently, here in Berlin, which is sort of a trendy, fashionable city, somewhere near the level of a Paris, I've seen more and more like, young women, girls walking around with like small DSLRs, walking around with mirrorless cameras. And it's become sort of like a fashionable thing, because the other part to that is that they've made these cameras more fashionable. They're sort of like trying to make them into the accessories that cell phones have become, which I think is going to be the thing that brings like them back to the market. I mean, you know, from a professional photographer's standpoint, these new like EOS M cameras from Canon aren't all that exciting. They aren't exciting to somebody that has a 5D Mark III or a 6D or something like that. But from like a consumer perspective, like it's a really sexy looking camera. It's small, it's portable. I mean, I could see the same people who would buy an iPad or an iPhone buying something like that. And that's exactly who are buying that camera. So that's why you're seeing like Canon shoot out like a different model, it seems, every month now. It's for that reason. It's for trying to turn it into the fashion accessory that cell phones have become.
Right. Yeah, I've actually seen that a lot too. We all know that cameras are getting smaller, lenses are getting smaller, and it seems like more and more I'm seeing more wannabe pocketable type cameras, and it
Hmm.
does seem like not only just a fashion thing, but it seems like a lot of the younger audience is kind of gravitating more towards the newer, smaller cameras, simply because I think they're more in tune with devices like iPads, iPods, cell phones, and things like that, especially when it comes to things that really only the millennials and kind of the younger crowd has, and that's something like a touch screen.
Yeah. No, no, that's exactly it. I mean, just the touch screen, especially with touch screen like autofocus, the small form factor. And but more than that, it's just like the look of it. The style has changed so much. It's no longer just these nondescript black boxes. If you look at the new, I think it's like the M20 or whatever, like Canon's newest camera is. It really has sort of that same sleek silver design as some of the new iPhones have, and I'm pretty sure that that's not unintentional.
Right, yeah, and that kind of leads me into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is where Apple and Samsung and Google and bigger companies like that, where we kind of see them heading with photography implementations. For instance, like something like the dual lens system on the iPhone 7, or the increase in megapixels for the Google Pixel, or even the Leica camera that has a lens built directly into the phone itself.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
what do you think about things like that?
Well, I think the new Leica cameras that are put out by Hawaii, like the P9 and the P10 and all that, I think they take amazing pictures. Yeah, there's this guy that I've been following on Instagram. I wish I knew his name. I think he has some sort of a contract with Leica or something like that, or he's one of those like Leica ambassador people.
Hmm.
And he's based in New York City, and he goes around and takes these pictures, and lately he's been taking them with I think the P10 before he was doing it with the P9, and I've been blown away with the quality that he was able to get out of that. I mean, there's something to be said about how much like an amazing lens can change your camera. I mean, I'm sure you've seen all of these add-on lenses that they have for cell phones now. You
Yeah,
know,
I've never gotten into those.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't think they're really going to catch on for the most part, but the fact that they're even trying it, goes to show that people want to take better photos, with their cell phones, and you know. The lenses are like one option. The other option is just better cell phones with like better cameras, and it's working with all the dual camera systems, and and having an autofocus system, a separate camera just for autofocus and things like that. And Zeiss lenses and Leica lenses built into these cameras. It really sort of like ups what you're able to do in terms of contrast and overall resolution. And I don't think it's like very far away from us being at a point where at least those sort of like high end high-end photographic aimed cell phones are taken more seriously. We're already seeing more cell phone reviews on camera websites, like DP Review and EOS HD and all of that. You're starting to see more people like review cell phones on that site, which is a sign of like just how serious people are taking this new generation of cell phone photography.
Right. And I mean, even something like Switchback Events writes in the chat, besides Tangerine, which is a short film, has there been another short feature? Has there been another feature shot on a phone? Has there been another big feature shot on a phone recently?
Yeah, yeah. There were actually like a few features like before and after Tangerine. I don't think a lot of them got as much publicity as Tangerine did, but yeah, there were several big features that were shot on iPhone and Android. There's actually a list somewhere out there. If you just type in phone shot, I mean film shot on iPhone, there's I think 8 or 10 that were at Sundance or some of the bigger festivals. So yeah, it's still definitely a thing.
Right. Yeah. And not only just films, which is an amazing feat to shoot a feature on a phone, but
Oh yeah.
for example, I think it was the magazine Elle Australia or something. They just made the cover of the magazine from an iPhone 7.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so cell phones. There seems to be a trend too of a lot of people snickering at cell phones, saying that Instagram and apps like that's not real photography, and that cell phones will never replace cameras. They'll never become the norm. People won't want to use cell phones like they will cameras, and I think we're kind of seeing that today. That people are starting to use cell phones like regular cameras, especially with Instagram.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I was exactly one of those assholes that that was saying that Instagram is bullshit and it's not real photography, and now every real photographer is breaking his neck to try and get enough Instagram followers, which they would have already had if they had gotten into it in the beginning,
Yep,
but
absolutely.
Yeah, for me, it was really a matter of the technology catching up to pro photographers. It's like now every camera, the Canon 6D, I think was the first like big full frame camera to have like Wi-Fi, and but now every camera has Wi-Fi built in. Every camera has an app that makes it easy for you to send, your pro photos straight from the camera to, your cell phone where you can get it on Instagram. So yeah, now it's a different world, but yeah, it's like the to the first person that gets into something like that go the spoils,
Right. Yeah.
and I think the big change is that like, people don't really like, consume media the way they used to, it's I mean these devices that people have in their pockets are how people interact with the world. This is how they get their news. This is how they, see the latest fashion. This is how like, they get their entertainment. So apps that are like, geared towards these devices are how people are going to like, this it's what's going to get them like the most attention. So it's like you just have to like, always try and be forward thinking, which is, you know, sometimes really hard to do, especially with, things that are as entrenched as print media and photography and these things that have been around for like over 100 years now. It's like it's often really hard for them to like pivot and sort of like get with the times, but like ultimately everybody has to. So
Right, and that's kind of one thing that I see is really lacking from the camera world. Well, not completely, but and I feel like cameras like the Sony cameras are starting to implement it a lot more, which is making all these other big companies like Canon, big huge boat, can't just turn on a dime. It's got to take a long time to actually turn and steer out of the way of the iceberg. Um, the Sony cameras are implementing software that is making it much more intuitive to use the camera. And I don't think we've come to a company yet or a camera yet where the software is almost as easy as a cell phone, which kind of blows my mind because you would think that camera companies especially would be one of the first ones to adopt the kind of cell phone market and the cell phone way that apps work and that the interface works and that you can easily get online and you can do all these things directly from the device. Why can't we do that with cameras? What's the holdup?
I think like, a lot of the holdup is basically the low level programming that's like, that these companies are used to. I mean, in a lot of instances, besides, I guess, maybe Canon and Nikon, when you're talking about Sony and when you're talking about Panasonic, you're talking about companies that also make, toasters and washing machines and like, and VCRs and things like that. So they're sort of, they come from a background where the programming is not that sophisticated, like I think a lot of their resources, a lot of like Sony's resources fall more into entertainment,
Right.
and like and their experience in like programming back ends for something like a camera is like really limited. I mean, I discovered this like firsthand doing the hack for removing the 30-minute time limit for the Sony videos. I was the first one to put that up, by the way, Chris.
I do remember. Yeah.
And yeah, if you look into the data that was coming out of that app, you'll see that like just about every Sony camera is running on Android OS like 2.0 or something like that. Yeah, something absolutely crazy. So like not even like Android 4 or something. It's running on like Android 2, which sort of raises a bunch of security questions for one, but it also like highlights like how far back in time like Sony is with their operating system. And and if they're still on like Android 2, like on on their cameras, like as far as I know, all the way up to the A7S and the A7R. I mean, I think they're still on like Android too. If they're that far back, then like, are we really going to be talking about them like, making a modern user interface? Like, how are they going to do that? Who's going to do it for them?
Yeah, right, right. They should take a page out of Phase One's book. Have you seen the? I think it's the XF100. Have you seen the interface for that?
No, no.
Oh man, it is literally like basically using a cell phone. The way it's mapped out, it's big, huge icons and everything. Kind of looks like apps and everything. It looks really nice.
Well, did you ever use like one of those Samsung cameras, like the NX1 or anything like that?
I wanted to. I never got a chance to. I never got a chance to get my hands on one, unfortunately.
Well, that was like using a cell phone because that's like sort of like Samsung's background. What they basically did was they took the best features of a cell phone and put them into a camera. So it had the touch screen and you could just flip back and forth as if you were on an iPhone or something like that. And like, all the settings were set up in a way that people that use cell phones would be extremely familiar with. You
That's
know, I,
interesting that they did that, but yet that camera and that kind of brand didn't succeed. Why is that, especially in today's world?
Well, they were only in the game for like what, like 3 or 4 years. I think, in order to like really gain traction, they would have had to have made a commitment, like, okay, maybe like, Sony's gaining traction, maybe they're number three or number two, and then you got Fuji, and then you got like all these other companies. So they would have had to have committed to a 20-year thing where, okay, we're going to lose money on this thing. It's like, Microsoft did when they got into the video game business. They came out with the Xbox, they were in last place, but they're like, look, we're going to lose money for the first like couple of years, but then like, we'll come back and we're going to be the number one or number two company, like, eventually. That's something that Samsung would have had to have committed to. They would have had to basically commit to, $1 billion loss at some point in order to gain like 6 billion at some point in the future. And while Samsung is like really popular with their cell phone division now, I don't think that they have roots as deep as like Microsoft and Google and Sony. So I don't think they were really in a position to take that $1 billion loss to be the number two or the number three company in 20 years. So I think that's sort of why they fell off. But as far as their technology goes, I think they were dead on. I think in a lot of ways, like, they've still surpassed, new cameras that are coming out now. I mean, for their touch screens, I believe they were using the same Gorilla Glass that they were using on their cell phones. So, really interesting. OLED touch screens,
Right,
by the
right,
way.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they implemented the H.265 codec, which still is not really being implemented today, only in a handful of cameras.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. They were so far ahead of the and Cinema 4K. Even the NX500s had Cinema 4K built into it, and the autofocus system that they use like rivals a lot of the autofocus systems that are in cameras today. So the technology was there, but like we were just saying, like you know, things move so slowly. It takes people a while to become familiar with like your brand. And even somebody as hip and as popular as Samsung, it would have taken a lot longer than like the 3 or 4 years that they were in the game for people to really catch on and like start taking Samsung seriously as a camera manufacturer.
Kind of like I get the feeling that that's kind of what Fujifilm recently did with deciding to go from their APS-C line to completely skip full frame and jump straight to medium format. What do you think about that?
Well, I was actually at Photokina in Cologne when that happened, and without a doubt, it made a huge impact. I mean, it was the talk of the show. It was the best camera of the show. And I think it was a very bold move on their part, because for one, it got people talking, it caught people's attention. And unlike Samsung, Fuji is a company with a long and storied, history, in photography. Their roots run very deep. They aren't going anywhere anytime soon, and people take their technology very seriously. I mean, there's sort of like a cult of Fuji users, just like there's a cult of Leica users. It's the same.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the same sort of type of photographer that believes in something like that. And I'm all for anything that pushes the industry forward. Even Sony, I feel, got to a point where, they became too comfortable and sort of started to rest on their laurels. So, I'm for anything that, pushes technology forward. Like, I was actually sort of disappointed in the A6300 when it came out last year. Like, I made a whole series of videos about how I felt that it was a step backwards for both Sony and for the camera industry as a whole. Like, for one, I felt like it was overpriced for an APS-C camera, and I felt like, them charging $1,000 for that camera was going to lead to price creep, which it absolutely did, because, there weren't really any cameras like that style and that size going for $1,000 at the time. For a little bit more, you could get the 7D Mark II or something like that. That was the kind of camera that you would pay $1,000 for, not a little rangefinder camera like the A6300, which, to be honest, was just like an A6000 with 4K in it. That's all it is, basically.
Right.
So in terms of photography, in terms of the body, in terms of what you're getting for the $1,000, I felt like that was a step backwards. And then you had something like the XT2, which was such a huge leap forward from what the XT1 had been. But you're still talking about APS-C, you're still talking about 4K, but then for them to do what they did with their medium format camera, the GFS, I mean, that was a revolution. That was, hey guys, there's a future out there. Why don't we go get it? And I wouldn't be surprised at all, if this camera was a commercial success, if they managed to sell a lot of them, then I wouldn't be surprised at all to see other manufacturers follow suit. I think at a certain point, Canon and Sony sort of have the full frame market wrapped up now. But that medium format market is a completely untapped market. I mean, you've got phase one out there, you've got Fuji now, and that's pretty much it. There was a Pentax camera 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah,
You
the
know,
645Z or the digital with the digital back or something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly. So, and those guys aren't really besides phase one, and I guess with the Hasselblad and everything. I mean, those aren't really heavy hitters yet. I mean, it's once Canon starts wading in there, once Sony starts wading in there with a medium format, then you're going to, I think it's going to be the resurgence and the regrowth of the market. I mean, something like that is what gets people excited and interested in photography again.
Right. Yeah. I think when there's huge leaps and bounds and a company, tries to make a bold move, it really gets not only just the photographers and videographers who care, but it also gets people who may not be on that same level interested, and hopefully, sprouts a new kindling towards a love of photography in the future.
Oh yeah, I mean, look at the Panasonic GH5, for example. Look at how many new videographers and photographers that's brought to the market. I mean, as soon as you started talking about 10-bit 4K 422 in such a small format, everything inside this $2,000 body. People got excited. They were, okay, that's the camera I want, where I can do all this. I don't think most people even understood half that shit, but they understood that there was something special about this camera and that they wanted to be a part of it. So a lot of that, just boils down to like inspiring people to go out and like, get this new thing and do something with it.
Right, and that kind of brings us around to well, let's talk about the GH5 is a video camera that it's a stills camera that's marketed towards video people. What do you think about video? Do you think video is, now that the internet and internet speeds are starting to reach, more respectable um, limits, do you think that video is going to be taking over photos in terms of social media?
No, no. I've seen it a lot on websites, but I really think it's the way video is handled now, it's really like sort of forced. Like, for example, if you were to go on IGN or something and look at like a video game review, like, they have the whole thing written out there, and then you'll see a video that's basically exactly what's written being read by somebody with like, a video collage in the background. No, I think the thing is, it's like people look for different things in photos and video, and like print. I mean, it's really like you know, there's a difference between like, an excellent trailer for a movie and a movie review or a good description of a movie or an article that's written about a movie. And I think that's why these things have always existed. I mean, video has been around for a long time now. I mean, we're talking about like, around like, 100 years or something like that, back to the Great Train Robbery. And every now and then there's like some new technology that comes out, like when televisions came out, after cinema, when you could have like, these devices in your home, but television didn't really kill off radio, and television and radio didn't really kill off print media, like, at that time. And so no, I don't really see video as ever really replacing photography, because they're sort of two different things, and people look to get two different things out of them. I mean, people want to see something live, something that's happening, or they want like, an escape when they look towards a video. And people want to see like, memories and ideas when they look at a photograph. And I don't see that. I mean, it's just basically the fundamental like, origins of both of them, and I don't see that ever really changing. That's always the way it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, companies like Snapchat and Instagram, and now even Facebook is doing it. They allow you to upload small, quick clips of video as your story or as your profile photo. It's now profile video, or they allow you to compile, a couple clips together in a small little stream that you can play. Um, and I feel like companies like that are trying not necessarily to bridge the gap between the consumer and short form video, but I feel like they're trying to bridge the gap in terms of allowing people to better showcase their world, their story, their environment, more so than just a single or even multiple photos can. But yeah, I concur. I still don't think, even in the future, video is going to ever replace what a single photograph can say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the other thing about that is that, like, I think that Vine was like, more of a step in the right direction, because, I mean, Vine and its users really understood, like, what it was to make like those 15-second videos or whatever. And then I really, what I liked about Vine is that it brought like just about 1 million new, like, videographers onto the scene, and it got people thinking about the idea of creating a story, like in video, and really having an understanding of, like, how to work within a limitation. It's like, if you really want people to be creative, you don't like give them the most expensive camera and like 2 months to shoot. You give them the cheapest possible camera and like an hour to do something, and you'll see them become really creative with what they have. And I thought that was a really brilliant way to go about it, the way that Vine did, with introducing this application, having this really small limit, and having people like work within it. I mean, you remember that's exactly how Twitter got started. You've got like this many characters to say something, make what you say count, and look where they are now. So I think like yeah, I think that's sort of like an important part, is sort of like forcing creativity through having people exceed their own limitations.
Right, and that's kind of something we were talking about in our last live stream, is that a lot of the new cameras that, and we'll kind of segue into the future here, but a lot of the new cameras that are slowly starting to come out, they have features that it entices the average consumer and even the semi-professional into thinking that they need that feature, but in reality, that feature or whatever it is about that camera isn't really ever going to be used to its full potential, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, particularly by people that lack the understanding, I mean, I think going back to the GH5, it's a perfect example. Like, it's like, I don't know how much use, like, the average person that bought that camera is going to get out of like a 10-bit 422 setup when they're using like an 8-bit monitor that probably isn't even color like corrected properly. The colors aren't set up properly, and they're supposed to be you know, and they're bragging about their 10-bit capabilities that they can't actually see. I mean, it's sort of like what I was saying about, like, the technology moving faster than, like, the ability of, like, humans to really comprehend it.
Right.
So
Having a big expensive rig or a big expensive camera or big expensive tools doesn't mean that you're going to get a good image, a good story, or a good video piece or photo even. It just means that you have really expensive gear, not that you really know how to use it.
yeah, well, the other thing is, like, the A6300 came out last year, and that's like already old junk. Nobody wants to talk about that, anymore. That's some old shit. That's like, an '87 Chevy Chevette. Nobody is really taking that seriously. But, like, the exact same people that were, passionate about that camera last year can still make some amazing videos. I mean, it's like I used to shoot my primary video camera, back when I was, primarily a director, more so than a photographer, was a Sony VX2000.
Hmm.
Like mini DV camcorder. You had to actually like record the video into your computer in real time. So if you shot 2 hours of video, you had to sit there for 2 hours, like, just to get it into the computer before you could start editing it. And
Yep.
oh dear God, if you wanted to export, you're talking about the rest of the day. And so, I would have killed for an A6300, like in the BX2000. I mean, literally, like, what, those 10 people, they're dead. Don't even worry about that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I would.
I mean, Stan in the chat says how were hard drive storage back for early video work, and I responded with hard drives. Like
Yeah,
back in the day when you were shooting mini DV, hard drive was not even a word. It wasn't even a thing yet.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
we were shooting on tape, and yeah, FireWire 400. You had to wait until the entire tape ran all the way through before you could even start editing. So.
Yeah, people just don't understand, you know. It's like the people out there that are running around with the 128 gig, like, you know, SD cards, and you know you could shoot up to, I don't know, 2 million photos with that, you know. And I remember like loading film into a camera, 24 exposures, you know,
Yep, that was it.
and that was it, you know. So I don't know. I think people just should take the time to master what they have before they move on to the next thing. You know, I'm not saying that, you know, people shouldn't get excited about new technology, but they should also, like, you know, learn to appreciate and master and get as far as they can with you know, what they have before moving on to the next thing. Like, because otherwise, I think like. Yeah, I think it's fine for what I was talking about earlier about how, you know, in a way, like, you know, cameras have become a fashion accessory. I think that's fine, like, you know, in the consumer level and for consumer cameras, but it just breaks my heart to see somebody, like, you know, walking around the Eiffel Tower, some old lady with a 1DX Mark II. Everything is set to autofocus.
No, oh no.
I see it all the time. It just used to kill me when I would see, like, you know, some grandpa, like, you know, with a 5D Mark IV or some other camera better than the shit that I had. And like, you know, this just no concept even of what they had, you know. And so, you know, I think the entire world would be a better place if, like, people just took the time to master their equipment. Like, the most popular camera on my YouTube channel. Now, mind you, I was at Photokina last year. Like, you know, I had the, you know, the medium format Fuji on there. I had the 5D Mark IV. I showed the GH5. I showed, like, you know, the XT2. I ran through every camera that was in existence up until last year on my YouTube channel. But the most popular camera that I had was the GX85, you know. That got like tens of thousands of views, way more than any other camera. And it was just this like cheap little Panasonic camera. And that made me curious enough to go out and buy one. I was like, all right, if like, you know, 90% of my users want to see this camera, then like I've got to see what all the fuss is about. And so for the past year, I've been just digging and digging and digging through the menus and going through everything that the camera could possibly do. Like recently, I uploaded a video on how to unlock Cinelike D, and like, you know, and I discovered all of the grids and all of the advanced like autofocus functions and all the crazy shit that you can do with it. Like, you know, going in and like, you know, doing all of your raw editing in camera like you can do with the Fuji's, like adding different picture profiles to it. Like, you know, I've just been going as far as I can go with the camera. And really, you know, I haven't gone that deep in any camera that, like, you know, I've used, like, besides that one. And I'm still not even like halfway done exploring everything that that camera can do. And I don't think I'm going to buy another like smaller camera like that until I get through everything that this camera can do, because it's sort of like playing a video game and always discovering a new world. You know, there's always something else to discover in this camera. And for the people that bought, you know, everybody that didn't buy an A6300 last year wound up buying an XT2. And holy fuck, look at what Fuji did. They released that 2.0 update, which gave you
Right.
like 100 new features on that camera, you know. So that is not an old camera. That's a camera that came out last year. It's built incredibly well, and it does a lot of things extremely well, even better now that it has that update. I mean, it would take you a whole year just to explore everything that Fuji put out in that update. So I'm looking forward to a future where somebody creates something so incredible that like everybody's going to have to sit back and figure out how he did it. Like when the 5D Mark IIs first came out and they started using them to film episodes of House on Fox, I'm looking forward to a future where people go, wow, you could do that with that camera, and then people start digging deeper. I think in order for that to happen, we're going to have to take a year off of new cameras or something so that people just sit down and take a look at what they already have.
Right, yeah, and that's kind of where I see at least the immediate future going. I mean, we just got the Sony A9, we just got the Panasonic GH5, the Fuji X-T2, and now there's talk of the Canon 6D Mark II and the Sony A7 III. And Sony's track record has been almost, every year, every 18 months, it seems, not even every 12 months, it seems that they're dropping new cameras. But with this one, I think they're taking their time, and it doesn't look like we're going to see any news until the future, September, October, around there. But I'm interested in the 6D Mark II. What have you heard on that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the news that I've been getting is that it's going to be the first full frame Canon DSLR to have like an articulating LCD for one,
Okay.
and and it's also supposed to basically have an autofocus system that's similar but not the same one to the 5D Mark IV. So I don't know if it's going to be the same like dual autofocus system that they have in the 80D and the 1DX, but it's supposed to be something similar. So really fast autofocus. I would be very surprised if it didn't have 4K. I would be surprised if it had Canon log. But I think that it's sort of like a make or break product for that series, but because the competition has become so fierce, like basically you can get like a Sony A7 now for like under $1,000, and you can get the A7 Mark II for around like 1,500 or so. And I really don't think that they're going to be selling the 60 for under 2,000. So I think like, it's going to be really important for them to come out with a lot of features that people are demanding. I think they're going to be hard pressed to not have 4K in that camera, because I'd be very surprised. I would be shocked actually if the A7 Mark III didn't have 4K. So I mean, we're at a point now where you've got little point and shoot cameras from Panasonic that come with 4K now. So it's sort of like inexcusable at this point for like Canon to not have that, and to not have a touch screen. I'd be surprised if it didn't have a touch screen as well. I mean, of course, it'll have Wi-Fi and GPS and everything that the original 6D had, but like I think 4K is a must, and I think you know Canon is going to have to become more serious about video in their photography cameras, just because it's like the user that they're expecting who's going to buy both like a 5D or 6D and like a C200 or a C300, that user does not really exist and is not going to be invented at any time. They're going to have to come to grips with the fact that like it would be smarter to sell like, 4 or 5 million 5D Mark IVs than it would be to sell 100 or 200,000 C200s. They're going to have to come to grips with the fact that those are two different people, and that those are never going to become the same person. Like, oh, I can just get like a 5D Mark IV for my photography needs, and I can get 6 or 7 C200s for my video needs. That's not going to happen, but they could sell a lot more of their cameras if they like included like all the features that people have been constantly requesting and demanding for the past 5 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, at least for me, I've come to the point where it's, I feel like I like to have my photo camera for my photography work,
Mhm.
and then my video camera for my video work.
Hmm.
I've kind of given up on the whole have it all in one, but
Hmm.
that's just me. And I feel like the general public, people who are maybe just getting their first camera and just deciding on whether or not they should go full frame APS-C or Micro Four Thirds, for them, maybe it might not be such a bad thing to have everything all in one body. Maybe that is what would get a lot more people to pick up a camera and actually take up photography.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the things that Canon is overlooking. It's the marketing aspect of it. There are a lot of people that never thought about like doing any sort of filmmaking before the 5D Mark II, you know. And like you said, like, the perfect camera is never going to exist. I mean, there's something about like, the ergonomics, the button layout, the pro level like features that you get from, a video camera that, just does not mesh well with like, the form factor, the size, and, the focus of a photography camera, so they're never going to have a camera that like directly appeals that that I should say fulfills the needs of like both of those camps, But like from a marketing perspective, to get people interested and excited in it, I mean, I think for a lot of people, the first time that they ever used LUTs or the first time that they ever did any color grading was when like, the A7S came out and it had S-Log, and it sort of like introduced this concept of color grading and using LUTs, and it got people excited about that technology. Now they're always asking for a flat picture profile or some sort of a log, and that helps because now look at how many of those people who got really big into using like A7S back in the day, look at how many of those people are now using FS5s and FS7s. They had this idea that was introduced to them in this smaller, cheaper camera, and then of course, like, they outgrew that and they moved on to the next thing. And so now S-Log is what they know, and they're shooting on FS5 and FS7. That's the sort of like mentality that Canon needs. I think that's probably why they added C-Log to the 5D Mark IV, because they realized that, hey, if we can get people more excited about C-Log than S-Log, then when they finally decide to move up to the next level, they won't be looking at an FS5. They'll be looking at a C200 or a C300.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of I see that too. It's funny you say that because up until the GH4 with Vlog, the JVC LS300 with their J-Log, the S-Log, the C-Log, all the logs, um, there really wasn't this urge, want, or need, aside from the professional community, for anyone to want to experiment with things like color grading and color correction, really go in depth. So yeah, when LUTs came out, well, LUTs have been around forever, but when LUTs really hit the mainstream and people started creating their own LUTs, selling their own LUTs, downloading LUTs, I feel like it kind of gave the entire community a fresh breath of air towards something new, and not just the same old, same old, same old, but also not something that would be limiting to certain individuals. They kind of just gave it to everybody, which I think is great because it allows anybody to pick up a camera, shoot, and kind of play around with colors and see how they actually work, and see how these cameras actually function to their full potential.
Yeah, I think the main thing that needs to happen in the industry is that a lot of people need to get fired, because I think there's like a lot of old ideas out there, and I think it seems like, companies will learn a lesson for a very short period of time, and then they'll become complacent. It's like going through a lot of trouble to get a girlfriend, and then once you've got it, you just sit on the couch and like, watch football all day.
Right. Yeah.
And then she inevitably breaks up with you, and you have no idea why. That's sort of like that's sort of like how I feel with like Sony. I mean, Sony like gained their reputation by like, sort of making improvements on all of the things that like Canon refused to do for years, and they sort of like, gained this huge share of the market just by giving consumers what they asked for. But now when people are asking for things from Sony, they're a bit slow to implement them,
Right.
so I think that like that's like a big that's sort of like the big problem that we have now. I mean, people have been asking Sony for a touch screen for years. They've been asking for like an articulating screen for years. They still haven't gotten that, except on like the bigger DSLR style cameras. And user interface improvements, like I said, Android 2.1 base, really simple interface without anything beyond what you could barely like use to function the camera and its features.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what you get with Sony.
So, excuse me, I didn't mean to cough into the mic. So, just to kind of, bring the whole show, tonight's live stream, full circle, I guess the last topic that I wanted to discuss, and we kind of already been talking about it, but the cameras of tomorrow, and I don't just mean, cameras coming out within the next 6, 12, 14 months. Where do you see photography and its impact on society in the next, say, 5 years, 10 years? I mean, the biggest thing, the biggest claim is, and I guess it is happening, is Panasonic is going to be shooting the 2020 Olympics in 8K.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
Now, I don't know if they'll be delivering in 4K, certainly not delivering in 8K, but
Right.
they'll be shooting in 8K. So with that on the horizon, with kind of medium format digital cameras coming around, and cell phones really getting not only just more popular with photography, but really getting the guts, upgraded and having way better components and lenses and all that stuff. Where do you see photography going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, 6K and 8K are already there. Even like, the A6300 basically shoots in like 6K and then down samples to 4K. I think it was something similar with like the XT2. It shoots in 5K and then down samples to 4K. So, the technology is already there for 6K. So I see like, we're always going to be like moving forward at this clip where we're like doubling and tripling the resolution. I think that's going to a trend that's going to continue for the next few years because I think that HD sort of like broke the barrier that we had for like increasing that technology, and now it's like as the nanotechnology, as the components become smaller and smaller, you're going to be able to just get a higher and higher resolution picture. But you know, I think it's going to be within the limits of like how many frames per second they're able to pump out. I think we are going to get that break that I was talking about. We're going to get that year because eventually, right now with the GH5, we're at 4K 60 frames a second, and I think for the consumer prosumer level, that's going to be as far as you can go for a while. It'll be a very long time before you see 4K 120 frames a second or 12-bit 4K. Everybody's computers are sort of struggling right now with 10-bit 4K, and people don't even understand that. So I think, we're going to be sort of like saturating around this like 4K 60 frames a second a thing for at least the next 2 or 3 years. They aren't going to be able to bring out another, ooh, wow, I got to have that sort of like technology for the next 2 or 3 years. You'll see a few more cameras with, you'll see a few more cameras with 4K 60 frames a second. You'll see a few more cameras doing 10-bit, and people will be like, oh, that's not really that much different than what we had last year. And I think that's when you're going to see people dig in a little bit more with the production side, with the creativity side, and you'll have sort of that lull that you had in between the 5D Mark II and the 5D Mark III, where people were actually going out and producing things instead of just like going out to get the next big camera. So that's sort of what I see for the next 5 years. I don't see anything in that time that's going to, really wow the industry.
Yeah, I mean HDR is already here. 4K is already
Yeah.
here. We're already getting companies like Hulu, Netflix streaming in 4K.
Yeah.
So
Well, we
the next,
haven't gotten the 4K televisions yet either. So, I mean, most people are still using HD televisions. So, I think over the next 5 years, like, you'll finally start to see that switch from like HD to 4K. So, the regular consumer will finally catch up with like, what, your typical shooters are out there shooting, capturing their formats in.
right. I mean the when we jumped from film to digital and we first got 480p,
Yeah.
everyone was ecstatic about that. We had digital that was usable. And then when we went from 480p to 720p HD, it was okay. It was great that we had an increase in resolution, but it wasn't a huge jump from 480. So when we went from 720 to 1080, almost doubling the resolution, I think that's when people really said, "Whoa, now we're at a point where we need to put the brakes on." And
Yeah.
I think 1080p is going to be a mainstay for a while. Let's see what we can do with this and roll with it. That's why when 2K came out, we kind of almost skipped over that and just went straight to 4K. And now 4K is kind of the 1080 of this era.
Yeah, and yeah, and I think we're going to be here for a while. It'll take a while for people to finally get 4K televisions in their homes for the most part, and it'll take a while for people to finally start pumping out like 4K content. So this is actually the part that I'm most excited about these next like 4 years where people can finally sort of see the fruits of their labors. They can finally see like, oh, well, this is like, 4K. I mean, you've got so many people out there that have been making 4K content for years and they haven't even seen it because they don't even have 4K monitors. So,
Right.
so like, yeah, I'm excited about like, the average consumer being able to catch up with the technology that's in all of these like fancy cameras. And I'm way more excited about people getting the chance to like use their creativity to actually produce content instead of like using their money to consume cameras.
Right. Yeah, and that's unfortunately a trend that a lot of people follow. They get gas and they don't mean gas. I mean gear acquisition syndrome.
Yeah.
And they continuously are just buying whatever they want, just spending all their money, and they're not realizing that that is not going to help you tell stories better. It's not going to help make you a better shooter. It's not going to make your photos better. What will make your photos better, make your videos better, is getting out there and actually shooting, editing, and putting your content out into the world.
I absolutely agree. And I really can't wait to see, you know, I wish I just only, I really can't wait to see the point where the next episode of BoJack Horseman is filmed on the GH5. I only wish it wasn't a cartoon. Then we could have that.
Excellent. All right. Well, I guess that's it. David, thank you for joining us, coming on and talking on our channel. Thank you guys in the live stream. Anyone that's watching on the replay, thank you. David, where can people find your work and find out more about you?
You can find out more about me on my website, dhienterprises.com, on Instagram, at The David Show on Instagram, DHI Enterprises on Facebook as well. And you can also find me on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/C/DHI Enterprises. And, or just go outside. I'm usually walking around somewhere. Come say hi.
All right, guys. Well, thank you again for watching. Hope you enjoyed the live stream. You know where all my stuff is in the links below in the description. thumbs up, subscribe to David's channel too. And yeah, thanks for joining us, and hope you guys have a great night.
Stay black, everybody.